Hi, my name is Nicole Golden, and I'm the host of the Mental Health Matters podcast. Today, we're talking with Mike Brannon, who is a licensed mental health therapist who deals specifically with family relationships and children. He has incredible insight about when to seek professional help for our kids and just some practical tips and ways to help them when they're struggling with mental health concerns. If you like what you hear, would you mind sharing? And if you haven't already, could you hit the subscribe button below? I'm so thankful you're here, and I can't wait for you to dive into this podcast. Thanks for listening. Hey everybody, my name is Nicole Golden, and I'm so glad that you're joining us today. I have a friend with me, Mike Brannon. He is one of my therapist friends and someone that we refer a lot of people to from Centerpoint. And so I'm so honored that you would join us. Mike, my first question for you is going to be, can you give us your credentials and then also why you got into the therapy, counseling, psychology line of work, and maybe what you specialize in? I know some therapists specialize with married couples or relationships. Some specialize with kids. What's your specialty? What's your it's your specialty?
So God has always kind of pointed me in the direction of helping kids and working with kids. So that's my specialty. But along with that has come working with the parents and working with couples and individuals, moms, dads, those kind of things. So I do a little bit of everything, but I would say, if I had to pick what is my specialty, it's kids. And that grew out of my background was working with kids in summer camps and, helping out the youth ministry at the church that I grew up in. And that turned into working at a residential group home for kids in the foster care system.
Wow.
Did that for quite some time and got more interested in the whole mental health side of things and therapy, and went back to school and got my master's and joined Dr. Hull in his practice here over in Lakeland. And I've been here for about 13 years now.
Gosh, 13 years now. That's crazy. And just the connection for you guys. So Dr. Kevin Hull has been my therapist. I talk about Kevin all the time. And I've been with him for about 14 years. So I've known Mike I don't think I've known you for the full 13 years, but at least for the past several years, he's been a really cool resource for our family, a lot of our friends. And so Mike's someone that we really trust. So I'm honored that you'd be on this conversation, Mike. As he mentioned, his specialty is with kids. And so that was kind of the tone our conversation is going to take, is to be a resource for parents who are walking through a mental health diagnosis with their kids, or who maybe sense that their kids are walking through a mental or emotional season where things just don't seem exactly right. And so that's where a lot of our questions are going to come from. So our first question, Mike's going to be a bit of a doozy. There are those of us, so for instance, I'll never forget when I was pregnant with Brooke, I had a session with Kevin, and I remember just sitting in the office sobbing and really just afraid of what Brooke was going to have to face mentally and emotionally as a result of my diagnoses. And so I think the first question is it, a parent who, and I have a lot of parents who will pull me aside after church on Sundays or will send me messages or whatever, just loaded with guilt. Like they're starting to notice their child has anxiety or depression or certain neurodivergent, tendencies, and just carrying the guilt and the blame that it's their fault their child is suffering. So can you speak to that? Like speak to the guilt and the shame, sometimes even the pressure we as parents carry. I know there's even some people who are afraid to have kids because of their diagnoses and afraid to pass it on to their children. So can you kind of speak to that guilt and that shame that as parents we carry?
So I'm gonna switch it to kind of a medical model.
Okay.
Let's say that you have a family history of high cholesterol. Well, yeah, that as you start having your family and your kids, there's a chance that your kid might have high cholesterol, but it's not going to help if we go to McDonald's all the time,
Yeah.
So switching it back to the mental health side of things, yeah, we know that, biologically, genetically, there are some things that, especially, whenever we're talking like anxiety and depression and, ADHD, some of those kind of diagnoses, that there is some genetics to some of those things. But there is things that as parents we can do to, to hopefully help make those symptoms less in our kids. I mean, I have ADHD, my son has ADHD. It's one of those things that, because of some of the tools that I've learned and because of some of the
Mm.
things that I got help with, I was able to then help him with some of those things as well. So, yes, I understand parents' concerns, but and of course, we all have mom guilt, dad guilt, those kind of things that we worry about as we're growing, these offspring.
Yeah.
What are we instilling in our kids? And we want them to be as straight as an arrow whenever we release them out, but we do the very best we can. And so I whenever I work with parents on some of that guilt and shame kind of stuff, we talk about some of those things and using some of those tools that we learned and passing those on as part of a healthy way of, hey, I've been through some of this stuff too. This is what I had to do. This is
Mm.
how I learned emotional regulation. This is how I
Yeah.
learned to identify some unhealthy thinking patterns in my own life.
Yeah. I think that's so good. Would you concur that like some mental health issues like anxiety, depression, some of the personality disorders, even I know there's been recent studies that even trauma can be passed down generationally. And I feel like sometimes that's so for me on my side of the family, there's quite a bit of mental illness that traces back generations. And so when it got to me and I started getting some of my diagnoses, I kind of took it as a challenge. And I have that kind of, I'm a 8 on the Enneagram, if that matters to anyone. So like
Yeah.
to me, I'm the challenger, right? So I'm like, okay, this is a challenge. I'm going to beat this thing down so that hopefully my kids get maybe a more manageable form of it. For me, all the mental
Right.
health stuff was unmanageable for a season. And so, is it true that that stuff can be passed down generationally? And then if so, I think I want to, so I have two parts. So part A is, so why don't you answer that first part A? So it is true that that stuff does get passed down generationally then.
Right. Yes, it does. And, especially with trauma and some of those things, we do see that, sometimes a person who has experienced a lot of trauma in their life, um, some of the values, and I
Mm.
talk a lot with folks about the values that we instill in our kids, but that's one of those things like, hey, stranger danger, that's
Mm.
something that as a trauma we learned. And so we pass that on to our kids. Hey, stranger danger, So some of those things are passed down, you know, through family values that are instilled. But I love that challenging spirit to kind of say, hey, this was an unhealthy thing that I learned, and I don't want my kids to learn that unhealthy thing. Um, so it's good to have that, and that's part of it too. Is that hey, if you realize that you are mentally struggling with some things, do it for your kids. Say, hey,
Mhm.
I'm going to go get the help that I need so
Mm.
that I can then be good for my kids and can be helpful and hopefully break some of these, unhealthy cycles of family lineage, so to speak. So,
Yeah. I love that. And I think, for those of us parents, for people who are in similar boats with me that do have mental health diagnoses, I think it's that fine line of how, because the funny thing is now, Brian and I always laugh, like, because I've done so much study and so much work on myself and in this field, I don't have a degree or anything, but just have been learning as much as I can. Um, with my kids, sometimes I'm quick to diagnose them myself, or like, oh, I see that little behavior, like, oh, are we headed towards this direction? And really funny story was, I do have some OCD tendencies that as a result of my anxiety. And so I bought a book for myself. And as I was reading it, I'm like, gosh, a kid version of this might be cool for my kids. I gave it to my daughter, who's in her middle school era, where super impressionable, didn't have any OCD, finished reading that book, had all the OCD, right? I mean, doing all the, and so for us as parents who are like, man, we want to make sure that a lot of this stops with us. How do we walk that fine line of being in tune to when our kids are struggling, but also not doing what I do, which is overdiagnose or freak out about every little thing? Or, you know what I'm saying? Like, how do we keep ourselves balanced in our approach with our kids instead of like living out of fear? I mean, that's honestly what it is. It's living in fear.
Yeah. And that's, I was reminded as you were sharing that, about my own experience sometimes with clients, I don't sit there and be like, oh, well, this is your diagnosis and this is your thing, because there is a worry about, hey, are they going to go home and, look this up on the internet and feel like their life is doomed? So we don't want to do, as my mom says, and if she ever watched this, she'll probably laugh at me, but you don't want to do any word curses, or trying to put a negative spirit on someone that, hey, they're doomed because of this thing. That it's more of a, hey, listen, this is something we need to be aware of, and we need to watch out for the warning signs. And so if we see some of those warning signs, then we say, okay, hey, this is something that we have to watch out for and make sure that it doesn't turn into a pattern of behavior or a pattern of unhealthy thinking. That it, just because my kid lined up all of their Hot Wheels cars in a row doesn't mean that they have OCD. It just means that, hey, they're lining them up for the start of the race, So taking some of those things into consideration, of course, talking to a mental health expert, or, or scheduling a session, to say even, hey, as a parent, I have some concerns. Here's some things. Is this something I need to worry about? And getting some guidance on that. And, a lot of times it may just be a session or two to kind of say, oh no, mom, you're worrying a little too much. They're fine. They're okay. But also maybe looking at, okay, there is a concern that we need to look out for. So.
Yeah. And we've done that. I know we've done that with you, with one of our kids. And I think it's been the blessing too of me being in therapy for so long with the same therapist, is that Kevin has been through every single one of my pregnancies, has gotten to know all the kids. And so there will be times when I'm in a session where I'll bring up something about, hey, here's something that went down. Do I need to further explore this with them? So even having that opportunity to talk about that with your therapist, your own personal therapist, is a blessing, just to get that guidance. So I think one of the main concerns I hear from parents, and I think sometimes they're even afraid to say this out loud, is if I seek professional help for my child, what happens if they go in and they tell a story about when I lost it and I threw something, or, I did, and all of a sudden now CPS is involved, or the mental health professional starts questioning my parenting, or there is that fear. Parents have that fear. And I think it holds a lot of parents back from seeking help for their kids because of that. I know when we've had to get our kids help professionally, it's been told us, hey, we will not be conferring with you unless we see that there's some kind of threat to their life or danger or something like that. And so that's very scary as a parent. And for a lot of parents, because we aren't perfect, we have those moments, especially if our kid is really struggling. So how would you speak to that fear that a lot of parents have about seeking help for their kids because of those tendencies?
Yeah. Well, and especially some families that, use corporal punishment or spanking, those kind of things, there is that concern. Believe it or not, in Florida, it's not against the law to spank your child out of discipline as long as you're not doing harm to them, which is the way that spanking's supposed to be handled. And I'm not an advocate for, corporal punishment or anything like that. But to say whenever clients come in, I realize that that's a fear of some parents, especially if they're over authoritarian or if they, you know, have that, kind of drill sergeant, hey, we grew up in the military and, we yell and scream and all of those kind of things. Okay, well, there may be some times that we do some parenting sessions on
Mm.
how to maybe handle some of those things. But for the most part, like you said, unless there is that serious danger to themselves or others, we do have confidentiality that, we're ethically bound to, that we have to hold with our clients.
Mm.
I tell parents whenever they're at the first session, I say, I'm not here to try to keep secrets or anything like that. I'm here to advocate and to help your child. And so there may be times that they tell me stuff that I'm like, hey, I think this is something you need to talk to your parent about,
Mm.
and, encourage them to talk to their parent about. Maybe even we practice how to have that discussion, and maybe we, have a discussion with parents later if the kid was like, I just couldn't do it, I was too nervous, or they were going to yell at me. I was like, all right, well, let me help you with that conversation and let's come in. That way I'm not breaching confidentiality.
Mm.
I got permission from the client to disclose that. But also, whenever working with parents, I let them know that your child, can share and hopefully does share what we talk about in session. That's part of the good, open transparency.
Mhm.
And I tell kids that just because I'm saying I'm not going to share it, it's your business. It's not my business to share your business. So
Mm.
you can share with your parents after session what we talked about and everything like that. But getting back to the fear of being reported to DCF and things like that, having worked with DCF for several years, I know that they have a lot bigger fish to fry.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times, there have been times that I've had to call, DCF on something, and it's more of one of those, I'm doing it to protect that I shared this information.
Mhm.
DCF comes out, they do a check, they're like, you've got a good home, yeah, you got in trouble, and yeah, your parents got upset with you because you got in trouble. Okay, case closed, no big
Yeah.
deal. you know
Yeah.
but for parents having not been familiar with that situation, I can understand that that would be a very fearful thing, and they're worried, like, oh my gosh, are they going to come take my kids? DCF has shifted over the years that they really don't want to have to take kids and from
Mm.
a home unless it is absolutely necessary. We talked about trauma before, and there is such trauma, excuse me, there is such trauma in removing kids from a home. Even
Mm.
if it was not a very safe home, it still does produce and add a layer of trauma there. So they're very careful about those things, and they don't want to have to do that unless it's absolutely necessary for the well-being and welfare of the child. So
I think it's interesting that you talk about a little bit about how they've shifted because I mean, would you agree since going through all those years of COVID and things like that, especially with a lot of these kids that, like, for instance, like my kids are, four, I can't remember now, 4, 7, 9, and 11, right? So, like, they were in very transformative years during COVID. And so, would you agree that we're seeing a spike in a lot of mental health concerns with kids as we've kind of progressed from that? Is there a particular, like, age group in kids that we're seeing a rise in the mental health concerns? Like, is there a particular age group, or is it just kind of like across the board in minors, like we're just kind of seeing this boom?
um I mean, as I've aged, the age of kids that I see is getting, less and less. I used to see, young little kids, even pre-elementary, preschool kind of kids, but I've kind of shifted that up to like 8 now. So um, I think that I think that there as a culture and as a society, I think that there has been an increased awareness of mental health issues and of the importance of mental health. Having a month like this of, mental health awareness is great because it is increasing that. And so we're seeing that, yes, there is I guess you would say, an increase in diagnosis of mental health issues, and especially amongst teens. But a lot of that has to do with some of the culture, that we have nowadays. It's totally different than whenever you and I were in high school, where that was our social circle, was just high school, and so there was comparison and there was drama in our high school. Well, now it's not just the high school. Now it's the high schools in general. Now it's this person in California does this, and this person in, over here does this. So there's a lot more comparisons, and, and sometimes that can be unhealthy, especially for teenagers, as they develop and become impressionable.
Yeah. So, I think that my point in all of that was just, as people are getting more, I think, aware and comfortable with mental health, as we're kind of diminishing the stigma of that, even just diminishing the stigma of the role of like CPS or DCF, and not allowing the fear of what that used to represent keep us from seeking help for our kids, and keep us from doing what we need to do because of how their organizations have even shifted as a result of the shift in the awareness of mental health. I think that's so interesting. One of the things that I've been seeing a lot with social media is kind of this pushback on these young girls who are having access to social media and getting involved in like Get Ready With Me videos and Sephora and things like that. And then these young boys who are involved in all the gaming and everything on their phone and being, so talk to me a little bit about, I know there is a big, a big push for, and a lot of questions about, do we give our kids phones? Do we not give our kids phones? And I'm going kind of off script here. This was not a question I gave you, but just as you were kind of alerting us to the fact that things have gotten a little bit worse with their awareness of everything. Some of the, and for us, so my daughter's 11 and most of her friends have phones and they have iPhones and access to social media. I just purchased her a flip phone, a track phone, flip phone, and it will remain with me unless she goes to spend the night at someone's house or goes out with a friend or has a field trip that I can't attend, just so that she can have access to me should she need it and need me to get her out of a situation or whatever. Is, their access to all this technology, is that, creating more mental health concerns? Is that, creating these, is that damaging to their mental health as they're being exposed to things that maybe at their age they're not ready to be exposed to? Could you speak to that a little bit with your experience?
Yes, I think kids are exposed to a lot more than, what we were. Like I said before, my high school, my small town was my influence. Nowadays kids' influence is a lot broader and a lot, huge.
Yeah.
So the influence is definitely a lot more. And so, once again, going back to what I said earlier about parents and our responsibility to, train up our kids in the way that they should go. That's a big part of it is, what works for you and what is necessary in your house might be different than than what is in my house. And so, letting kids know that, hey, just because, Johnny's mom lets him stay up until whenever doesn't mean that I'm going to let you stay up until whenever.
Yeah.
House, this is our rules and this is what I'm comfortable with. And also a lot of it deals with the responsibility of kids and how responsible they are. I've met some 13-year-olds that, man, they were very responsible. They had to take care of brothers and sisters. They had to, they were kind of parentified in their role in their house. And so, yeah, they're they need to have a phone,
Mhm.
but then I've seen other kids that, man, no way. Like no, I don't think you're ready. So, once again, it's on a case by case basis, and especially in working with a mental health provider, parents can discuss those kind of things with them and can talk about like, what do you think as far as, how my kid is developing and where they're
Yeah.
at? Do you think uh, they're ready for that kind of a responsibility? Um, so therapists are great at being able to help out with some of those tougher calls sometimes.
Yeah.
So,
And I love, like, I switch back and forth between calling Kevin my therapist and my counselor, but I do like the idea of like counselor, and that's really what you guys are there for, is like for a sounding board for us to be able to like talk about what we're thinking through, processing, getting another perspective on it, especially with all of your years of experience working with so many different kids and families and really gleaning off of that wisdom. So I love that approach. All right, I've got two more questions. The next one is one that I really struggle with personally, is when due to the trauma from my background, and then I have a daughter and she looks just like me, acts just like me. So there are times where I am parenting out of my grief of the little girl that I've had to kind of mourn over, that, the little Nicole that I've had to mourn over and stuff. But then I'll randomly see her, little Nicole, in Brooke, and I'll react to that. Sometimes I'll react to it out of grief. Sometimes it'll be out of anger. And it's not at Brooke. It's out of fear of, I don't want you to get hurt like I did. I don't want you to walk down this road, those sorts of things. So I know I was just talking to another parent the other day that her husband has walked through some major traumatic experiences with his father. And so as a result, after their couple of kids were born, he kind of moved all of his attention into work, because I think that was easier than dealing with the trauma of re-seeing himself in these kids, So how do we process that? How do we as parents regulate that when we begin to see our younger selves in our kids, and it's almost like our body goes into fight or flight against our kids, for our kids, as you know what I'm saying? How do we regulate that?
yeah. Yeah, and that transference is, is tough to navigate because, it's like the dad who, loves sports, enjoyed sports, wants his kid to do sports, forces them to do sports, even though maybe they're not athletic and don't want to do sports.
Yeah.
So it is kind of a hard thing to navigate. I totally understand, a dad saying, you know what, I had a horrible dad. I don't want to be a horrible dad, so I'm just gonna back out. Um, and that's, you don't want to do that approach either. So it's kind of trying to find that balance of
Yeah.
where is that fine line of being involved and helping, and saying, hey, these are some of my past experiences that I went through, good, bad, and different, and trying to help shape them, as they're having their own experiences. My son is getting ready to graduate this year, and so there's a lot of reflective looking back on some things, and there are some woulda, shoulda, could have done some things differently, but there's also, a lot of great experiences that he had that were his own that, I'm glad he had. So learning that balance of, when to intervene, when to not intervene, when to let them have that experience, when to tell them, hey, here's some things that I went through, and I don't want you to have to go through those same mistakes. So watch out for some of those pitfalls.
Yeah. And I do think it speaks to the importance of us, even as parents, seeking the help that we need in order to deal with our past so that it doesn't inform our future, right? Or that it informs our future but doesn't wreck our future. And there have been times where I've had some really cool conversations with Brooke about, things that I've learned in dealing with my anxiety, and even us learning to regulate together. And then there's been times too where I've had to tell her, whoopsie, should have put my phone on silent. Not that. But probably that too. But there's been times where I've had to tell her, alrighty, that's my dad speaking. Anyway, speaking of parenting and everything else, train of thought. Where is it? It derailed. But talking to her about like, hey, like these are some things that also trigger me. Like, and these are some things that worry me when you act like this. Like, is this something that you can control? Does this feel like something that's out of your control? We've had really honest conversations, but I think it's, as you stated, like learning when to be age appropriate, learning when they're able to understand and process that and not carry it as though it's their fault. I think that's been a big thing for me to learn with her. So here's my last question is just, at what point should parents seek professional help with their kids? Like, what are some warning signs where it's like, this has maybe crossed a line to where this is not just something that we can help with or the church can help with or a community group or whatever, but we're going to need to bring in a therapist.
Yeah. So once again, it's different case by case, but the general answer would be is when you are seeing that it's having a detriment on their life. So for my son, like I said, ADHD, we saw that, he's having a hard time focusing, and there's some times that he's not comprehending some things, but, he's working through it and that kind of stuff and was doing okay. But then we saw it starting to take that detrimental approach where it was affecting his self-esteem, and he was really starting to feel down about himself and, was starting to do some of those unhealthy comparisons and, I'm not as smart as everybody else. And it's like, no, that has nothing to do with it, And so trying to work with him on some of those things. And it was like, okay, now we need to go, talk to a professional about, getting him some additional help with this. So, and we did, and it worked out well. It's looking to see, okay, is this just a phase? Is this just something that, okay, this is going to pass? But if we see that, okay, this is something that is, detrimental, then, okay, we need to go seek out some help. And, and like I said, therapists are accustomed to, hey, if we just have a couple of sessions, one or two, get to know you, hey, here's what's going on, and then second session kind of, okay, here's some things to work on. Okay, that's great. Maybe it is just a brief encounter with the therapist that, hey, we did this. But, counseling doesn't have to be like this. Oh my gosh, there is this lifelong thing of sessions. But for some people, hey, we do need that, and so that's great. So, yeah.
I love that. And different ones of my kids have had different stints with counseling, and then I've been with a counselor for 14 years. So it's different things for different people depending. And I think the most important thing is finding a counselor that you can trust. And so that's why I'm loving that you guys are getting a chance to hear from Mike, see Mike, because he is someone that we refer to regularly. And I know as we continue to update our mental health resources page on our website at centerpointfl.org, we will have a couple of vetted counselors that we really trust for kids, so that you guys can make sure that you are in a place where you're going to be safe. So, Mike, I really appreciate your time.
Sure thing.
And I appreciate you answering some of these questions and even sharing some of your own personal experience. It's so cool to hear actual stories and that sort of thing. So thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you.
All right.
And
bye.
Bye. Thank you.
See ya.